Have you ever received a Christmas present that made you burst into tears? Last Christmas I decided to surprise a friend of mine who was spending Christmas alone. She lived around 3 hours from my home, and so I set off on the drive. It was around midnight, as I was about an hour from her house when I got a flat tire. I had changed multiple tires before, but my mom's car had always suffered from being sort of awful. Either way, I started to work on the tire, attempting to take the hubcap off to get to the screws. I didn't have a hat or gloves, and it was snowing and freezing outside, so it was slow going. After about 45 minutes of failure at the hands of the tire and freezing, I assumed I'd be stranded here all Christmas. As soon as I had decided to give up, I heard a loud noise behind me. An ambulance had pulled in beside me, and 2 men got out. They asked me if I was okay, and if I needed any help. I explained that I'd been at it for an hour, and I had it. It was just taking a long time. I'm too prideful for my own good. They realized I was soaked from being in the snow, so they told me to get in their ambulance and they'd change the tire for me. I immediately burst into tears right in front of these 2 strangers. I climbed into the back of the ambulance. They gave me a blanket and put the heater right on me and changed the tire rather quickly. I just sort of sat there wiping away tears and chatting with one of the EMTs. They were great guys, and had apparently turned all the way around from their route to help me. When I asked how I could thank them, they just laughed and said to make sure to help people in need. TLDR. EMTs saved me on Christmas when I had a flat tire and I was freezing to death. EMTs, doing it right. My mom got me a book about some long dead coal towns in Southwest Virginia. I was very perplexed until I figured out that it had images of my dead father as a child along with the rest of his family in it. I cried like a baby. 2 years after my dad had died, I was 8 when he died. My brothers found a gift he had bought for me when they were selling his house. It was this gorgeous silver jewelry music box with my name on it. They wrapped it and gave it to me for Christmas. I cried all over it. It's one of my most cherished possessions. My mom called me up Christmas Eve at about 9 o'clock and recited the night before Christmas to me. It was midnight her time, and she used to do that before bed for me and the sibs back when we were little ones. Oh, that's so sweet. My grandmother gave us pajamas every Christmas Eve. She died last year on the 13th of December, my mom's birthday, coincidentally, but had been able to go and shop for us before she died. Cancer-ridden, that amazing woman went out in a wheelchair to make sure we still had our Christmas tradition. Opening those pajamas on Christmas Eve both broke my heart and made me really happy. I didn't stop crying for almost an hour or so. Yes, I used to be the proud owner of a ZX Spectrum 128K M2. I'd had it since I was 7. I used to love trying to program it, but because I was inexperienced I kept just trying to make huge basic programs and I'd run out of memory. I wasn't particularly very good, lol. Anyway, I persevered and was stuck with it. One Christmas, my father bought me an Amiga 500. At that time, it would have cost about £400, which was a heck of a lot of money back then, and even as now, really. I just ran and hugged him and cried for about 10 minutes just saying thank you. Thank you. Last year my family's financial situation was dire. They'd spent nearly $500 on getting their LP tank filled and were barely covering other bills and whatnot. I knew there wasn't going to be a Christmas, so I bought them pretty utilitarian gifts. Sweaters, socks, blankets, a few nice cooking pans. Ended up buying my brother a Wii and a few games. I didn't expect anything back. I knew they didn't have the money. Just wanted to have a day where everyone could forget the cold creaky house, laugh, and have a decent meal. It was really hard to keep emotions in check when my mom went in her room and came back with a really old looking green jewelry box. It was my great grandmother's diamond engagement ring. Whoa, nobody ever robbed a grave for me. When I was 8, my parents got divorced. Due to the circumstances, custody of my sister, myself, and my brother was awarded to our stepfather. My mother would visit from time to time after that, when our stepfather, now guardian, would allow. After about 6 months, we moved about 2,000 miles away. My mother couldn't afford to move. I didn't see or hear from her for more than a year and a half. I was depressed beyond belief. My mother and I were always close. Again, due to the circumstances of the divorce, I was always afraid I would get horrible news about my mother. She's sick. She's dying. She's alone and sad. All those awful things you think of at 9 years old. One Christmas, my maternal grandmother asked my stepfather if she could take the 3 of us back to our hometown for a 2-week visit. I had never been especially close with my maternal grandmother, but I was excited anyway. I didn't like my stepfather turned guardian, and thought Christmas with someone who actually loved me would be really great. So the day comes, and she picked us up in her burgundy Crown Victoria. I remember the car especially, because it was so huge. As we pull away from the house, ready for the 8-hour drive back to our hometown, she says we have to make a stop. She stops at the grocery store near our house. I'm thinking, do we need snacks or something for ride? But no, out of the store runs this lady. She looks so much like my mother, but 40 pounds lighter. It was my mother. I remember her shaking like a leaf, so excited to see all 3 of us. All 3 of us cried like babies. She told me later she wanted to cry, too. She wanted to cry, and scream, and laugh, and giggle, and just generally lose it. In the moment, though, all she could do is smile and tear up a little and just give us hugs. She said it was so overwhelming she felt lightheaded. That was and is the best Christmas I have ever, or will ever have. During high school my dog of 10 years died. She ended up having multiple tumors and couldn't be saved in the end. My mom was really close with the dog and would spend 99% of her day with her. So when she was being put down, my mom couldn't handle it. It was just me, the vet and my dog in the room when the vet made an impression of her paw in clay. This was about a month before Christmas, so I got a really nice frame and the best picture I could find and put the impression and the picture side by side. I felt bad because she opened it Christmas morning and just started bawling. It's still in our family room though. It's always the pet stories that gets me. Damn it. I was given a rescue kitten. She was brought out in a shoebox with little holes in it. I opened it up, and there were 2 little eyes looking up at me. She's been my best friend ever since. Best present ever. I feel like your username doesn't reflect the sentiment of your comment. Oh. My father made me an end grain cutting board out of hardwoods reclaimed from my grandfather's barn and dad's old house that we remodeled together. I live 2,000 miles away, so having a piece of my family history in my kitchen is so awesome. Plus it is an amazing cutting board. 36 x 13 inches. Yes, 3 feet long. I'd be interested in seeing a photo of it. When I was a kid, probably around 10 or 12 years old, we were having the thinnest Christmas we'd ever experienced. My mom was a 911 dispatcher who didn't make a lot, and my stepdad was an EMT on the local rescue squad. It was a really rough year. We're talking no physical gifts, just our time together and love, which ultimately was okay. Even as kids, my brothers and I understood what was going on. Christmas morning came, and we were all eating breakfast when a knock came on the door. We weren't expecting guests, so my mom was confused about who the heck it could be. Opened the door. It's the whole Missisquoi Valley Rescue Squad, with bags and bags of gifts for us kids. We were absolutely floored, and everyone was bawling their eyes out. People can be amazing sometimes. Not Christmas, but too good not to share. I'm currently spending a year working in Europe as a nanny while my family is back home in the US. I was planning on cooking my host family a big Thanksgiving dinner, so I asked my mom to send me all of her traditional Thanksgiving recipes. A box arrived with every recipe written out on little index cards for me to use, little notes and tips, various ingredients that can't be found easily here, and then I see tucked away behind the canned cranberry sauce, the apron worn by my mom to cook every single Thanksgiving, Christmas, and Easter feast since she received it. I gave it to her when I was 3 years old. It has my name and the date written on it, and it is covered in my 3-year-old handprints. Something about being sent this stained and old apron, with my tiny handprints. I'm now 22. From my mom who was 6 time zones away made me break down into tears. Brutal. I'm male, but aprons have huge symbolic and sentimental meaning to the women in my family. I can totally understand the effect that would have had. 9 years ago I got a liver after waiting for months on the list. Not so many tears shed then, but since there sure have been a lot. I cried when I got SNES at 8 years old. We were poor and I knew how expensive it. I felt like my family would never be able to afford one. This year, Christmas was great for the kids, I made sure of that, and I got my wife something. But presents were bought in November and I work full commission. December was a terrible month at work. I had taken to visiting my parents and grabbing a snack over there and not eating at home because I honestly didn't know that there was enough food to last until payday. Christmas Eve my parents showed up at our house with a truck bed full of groceries for us. I bawled like a fat kid that had his Twinkies stolen. I bawled like a fat kid that was given a truck bed full of Twinkies. FTFY. My twin sister and I are singers and perform all the time. Our older sister had been keeping all of the programs of the shows we've been in since we were in 5th grade. She made an amazing scrapbook for us that showed all of our performances over the years. It's unbelievable. She has been planning it for so long and it was totally worth it. It's the most meaningful gift I've ever received. I started crying as I flipped through all of the pages. If anyone wants to see pictures of it, I can post them. This year, my parents absolutely destroyed me with a framed picture. It's of my grandpa holding me on his lap when I was probably 5 or so. I'm curled up in his arms, looking up at him. He's looking down at me like I hung the moon. I was born just after his wife died, and my parents named me after her. This is our second Christmas without him, and I hadn't really processed the loss yet. I mean, he'd been ill for ages, and he'd been a widower since before I was born. He missed his wife dearly, which I knew, and he'd buried almost all his siblings and friends. So when he passed, I was relatively nonchalant about it. After all, he was finally at peace. But Christmas was always at Grandpa's, and I was already missing him terribly. Then I opened this picture, and I immediately teared up. It was one of the first gifts I was handed, though, so I kept it together. Until late that night, I was sitting, playing MW3, talking to the boyfriend, and it just hit me like a sledgehammer. I cried for 2 hours. Got all the morning out all at once that I'd been bottling up since he passed. Felt good, man. And I love this picture so much. Just like I know Grandpa loved me. My brother got me a Christmas card that says inside of it, "My best memories always have you in them." It made me cry because I live far away from home and hardly see my family anymore, and I especially miss my brother. He was always like my best friend. This will be buried, but it's worth telling. When my grandfather was a boy in the Depression, he had many Christmases with no presents. Before he died, he laid aside money for every one of his 5 kids so that they would get a check around Christmas and never have a Christmas without presents. Each year my mom gets a check from her mother of around $700-800. My senior year of HS, my family was in a bad place. We were struggling to pay tuition for college HS and had a mortgage payment, as well as presents to get. My mom was up every night worrying if I would get to go back to school or if she could afford the mortgage payment. We got the grandpa check in the mail, and when my mom opened it there wasn't $800 written, but there was $2,500. With a note saying "Merry Christmas from Papa Larry." He gave us our Christmas and paid the mortgage payment, all from beyond the grave. Suffice to say my mother and I were in tears. This was the first post that actually made me tear up. Glad you shared. Went home to have Christmas with the parents knowing that it would be my mother's last Christmas as she had terminal cancer. We all knew, as did she, but everyone put on a brave face until she gave me her present. It was an embroidered cloth done by her, hours and hours of work, signed and dated by her in stitching. I knew that it was something to remember her by, and the lump in the throat was enormous. Tears followed. This past year my great grandma died, so for the first time since I was born we didn't have Christmas dinner at her house. When my grandmother cleaned out the house earlier this year she found a ton of quilt squares that never got made into quilts. She made them into pillows for her siblings, all the grandkids and all the great grandkids. We all opened them at the same time, and when she told us what they were everyone started crying. It was really sweet. Yes, but it wasn't meant to. I have awesome parents. The most loving, caring people a kid could ever ask for. I think I was about 7 or 8, and I open a gift and it's a giant pink eraser, and in big black letters it said, "For big mistakes." I totally misunderstood it and thought they meant me. Burst into the worst crying and sobbing. They made it all better though, just like they always have. LOL. That's sad, but also funny. Last year, my family were all doing pretty well financially, so my mom decided to get us gifts of donations for different things in very poor countries. For one of my brothers, they donated a goat to a family. For my stepsister, they donated soccer balls to children. And for me, they donated money to go to maternal care in Afghanistan. I had just suffered my second miscarriage a month prior and I've been lucky enough to have excellent healthcare, so it meant a lot to me that the money donated would be going to women who truly needed it. I burst into tears. I keep the card on my fridge and just writing this out is making me tear up. I got my girlfriend a digital photo keyring last Christmas and filled it with photos of the two of us. She has never used it as a keyring, but she cried and I got a BJ, not at the same time. Upvote for the clarifying statement. No, but my little bro gave my mom a gift that made everybody cry. It's the sweetest, most thoughtful gift I've ever seen. My mom had 2 ceramic figurines of an old woman and an old man, obviously husband and wife. My grandma gave them to her years before. Well, one day when mom was cleaning, the figurines fell off the shelf they were on and both of them shattered into 1,000 pieces. My mom cried so hard, she was heartbroken. She'd had them for years and they were 2 of her most prized possessions. She swept up the pieces, put them in the trash, and threw them away. Fast forward several months to Christmas. My little brother, no older than 12 or 13, handed mom a carefully wrapped box. My bro had gathered all the pieces out of the trash and glued both figurines back together, piece by piece, almost perfectly. It must have taken him days, if not weeks. We were all blown away that he was able to even do it, and we were all overwhelmed with emotion when my mom reacted the way she did. TLDR. Mom accidentally shattered 2 prized ceramic figurines and was heartbroken. Little brother glued them back together and gave them to her for Christmas. Best gift ever. I made my mother cry with her present. I managed to find a boxed gift set of the discontinued perfume her deceased mother used to wear. I took a lot of pictures of her crying. My best friend's girl got me a discontinued perfume I used to wear throughout all of high school and part of college. I found out a couple years ago they don't make it anymore. I know it sounds stupid, but since high school I really screwed up my life. I always loved those times, and to smell those days again made me feel like they were still vividly near to me. The Christmas after my uncle committed suicide, I swear my grandmother and mother were trolling me with this gift, just to get me to cry, which I never do. I was the one who discovered the corpse, which wasn't pleasant. I'm the one who took his dog in. I'm the one who had to talk to the cops and EMTs. I never wanted to go back in his house again, but did to help clean out stuff and see what we could sell, what things each person wanted for sentimental value to remind us of him. All I wanted was one of his Zippo lighters from his collection and his Fender guitar that I strummed my first note on when I was 8 or so. Got the lighter, some other stuff that my parents insisted I take. There were guitars in the house, but not that one. The Christmas after he died, my grandmother says to my other uncle, "Why don't you get that other thing we have for him? It's down in the basement." He comes up with that Fender Stratocaster that I borrowed for a few months to learn my first few songs. It will never be played again, but as long as I have it in its stand in the corner of my basement, every time I go down there I see it and think of him, and well, all my family, and how those buttholes had to see me cry on Christmas night. Maybe some year you'll be able to honor his memory and pick it up again. I hope so. Peace be with you. Last year I witnessed a boy burst into tears and essentially snap his copy of NHL 11 and 2 because he wanted Black Ops. I can't even imagine being spoiled like that. Even worse, being the parent to allow that to happen. I watched videos of my husband getting gifts as a child. It was just shameful. I have so many Sega games and they're hard to keep up with. Not even a thank you, just complaining. Speaking for my mom here, a few days ago my mother got a package in the mail, unbeknownst to both of us as to the source or reason. She opens it up, and bam. I've never seen her cry so hard. Turned out it was a photograph of her mother, who is deaf, signing "I love you." This wouldn't be so significant usually, but her mother had just passed away not even 2 months ago. When I was in 3rd grade, my teacher read us a book called The Bird's Christmas Carol. Ever since then, it's been one of my favorite books. The first year that I spent the holidays with my husband's family, I noticed his grandmother had a copy of the book, the same edition I remember from childhood. I told her about my teacher and how she read it to her 3rd graders each year and how much I loved the story of the dying but selfless little girl. A few Christmases later, we were back at their house again, exchanging gifts, and she handed me a small package. It was my very own copy of The Bird's Christmas Carol, only this edition was from 1897. She remembered my love of the story and my affinity for old books. I burst into tears, along with everyone else in the room. It was, and still is, the most precious and thoughtful gift I've ever received. My mom had hip replacement surgery this summer and hasn't gotten any better yet because she has MIS and the physio she was getting didn't account for that. She's been moved to a nursing home at 61 years old until she gets better, which she hasn't yet. I live an hour and a half away from where she is and I had no way to get to her. I had waited too long to get a rental, which is prohibitively expensive in my current financial situation, and felt like the worst son in the world. Christmases have been good and bad, but they've always had one constant, and that was my mom. She had told me it was okay, that we'll figure out some other time we can get together or work it out. I met up with a friend for his birthday 2 weeks before Christmas. I've only been getting to know him and his wife recently, but they've never been anything less than the sweetest couple. I am embarrassed to share my feelings normally, but have been trying to be more open with people, and when I told them the situation, they without hesitation offered me their car. The 3 of us were out at a local fish and chips place and I tried to hold back the tears, but I couldn't. It wasn't the fanciest Christmas meal at my mom's apartment, but I got to see her on Christmas and it was incredibly special to me. Not a gift for me, but my granddaddy. Granddaddy was a lieutenant commander in the Navy in World War II and had long since lost his uniform. Long story as to how this came about, but after his father passed away, on a Christmas morning, Granddaddy's stepmother sold all our family heirlooms and threw out his uniform with all of his decorations on it. Incredibly proud of his World War II involvement, he was completely devastated this happened. About 10 years ago, my grandmother contacted several organizations, compiled his award and discharge papers, and spent an entire year reacquiring his war medals. She had them framed surrounding a picture of him in his uniform. She waited until everyone had finished unwrapping their presents, and then brought his gift out. He unwrapped it, paused for a moment, buried his face in his hands, and sobbed. Unquestionably the greatest Christmas exchange I've ever seen. This happened yesterday actually. My family doesn't have much money since my parents divorced, so Christmas has been small the past few years, but it's never bothered me. My younger sister and I are close and love each other dearly, but aren't exactly the best of friends. For perspective, neither of us are morning people and fighting over the shower in the morning is a daily event. Music is one of the few salvations I've had over the years, and thus my iPod was one of my most precious possessions. It was recently dropped and its screen shattered and was dying a slow, painful LCD death. I don't have much money as my job cut my hours in half recently and have to make car insurance and car payments every month, so getting a new iPod wasn't possible. When I opened her gift yesterday, I was enthralled. I couldn't be happier that she would save up her money to get me one. It wasn't until the quote she got the back did I burst into tears. It read, "Both we and our words are overproduced by influence." A simple quote from Circa Survive's song, Act Appalled. This was the quote that I lived by when my parents were going through a really ugly divorce. My dad said a lot of terrible things that made me question his integrity as a person, and as such those lyrics rang true to me. It may not be as sentimental or endearing as some other gifts, but it showed just how much I meant to my sister. I'm tearing up writing this on break at work. Love you sis, wish you were a Redditor. As someone who has had an iPod get them through some tough times, I think this is a truly amazing gift. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.